system. And the end result has been an electoral system where the people end up with the short end of the stick, while the political class hijack the political space and proceed to brazenly compromise electoral officials, sometimes with brute force, security agencies, and the electorate, ultimately stealing votes to get into public office. The consequence is the social, political, and economic pestilence that blights us all and reverses the fortunes of our country. It is gratifying to note that Mr. Itodo and Mr. Osazi are panelists in this year's lecture. Both men have played crucial roles in the last few years in patriotic attempts to shape our electoral system. I have absolute confidence with their impressive credentials. They will be able to set the tone of the conversation around this issue and chart a way forward for their engagements to ensure votes of Nigerians count in 2023 and beyond. It is my belief that our celebrated journalist moderator, Maope Ogun Yusuf, will bring to bear on these discussions the intense scrutiny that is so important in establishing a communal ethos of continuous audit and a habit of accountability in public life. Welcome, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. I was just going to call your name right from there, and I remember the Nas Capone. Thank you so much, our dear Nas Capone, Mr. Abiola Uwaje. I think that you have set a very good tone for this conversation. You've spoken about who Mr. Ralph Opara is and why it is extremely important that he be remembered. I mean, I read up on his life and time, and from the summary which Nas provided on him, I was rather shocked that he was a broadcast journalist, and it's a good thing because I'm also a broadcast journalist. And in our country where we rarely remember the efforts of our heroes past, I think that it is really commendable that this is what Nas is doing to continue to immortalize him and his legacy. Well, we have here his family, who I'm sure this day is also a significant day for. It is not easy to lose a loved one. I can only imagine what this day will be like, but to know that a loved one is remembered for good and that he's celebrated and that his cause, that of fighting for social justice, is something that is carried on by many more people, I'm sure must be a really comforting one. So let me quickly invite, without speaking too much, to the podium. There's no physical podium here, but it just means that you'll unmute your mic. Mrs. You have to forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your name right. Ms. Chioma, I'm not sure if you're a Miss or Mrs. now. Well, you're a daughter of the Ralph Opara family. So I just welcome you to the podium, and I'll let you do the proper introductions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Malpe, and thank you for your work. Dad will definitely be proud of the gathering today and the topic we have here. Mom's right here, Francesca Ralph Opara, she's asked me to deliver her comments and the family's comments, and I hope that's acceptable to all. So I won't Uzoma Ralph Opara, I won't Molo Ralph Opara, and Onya Francesca Ralph Opara. This is his wife, and I'm his daughter, the second of his two daughters and the last. It gives us great delight to thank the National Association of Sea Dogs for celebrating my mother's husband and our father, and for staying the course in seeking the upliftment of truth, redress of societal ills, and reinstitution of tenets of transparency, accountability, and fair access, which are tenets of a truly democratic society and one built on democratic principles of freedom, equity, justice, and law. We reel at the instrumental, critical, pivotal, and touch points of this annual series since it was kicked off, and the most laudable initiative of NAS in celebrating my father's legacy. As a family, we both tearfully, like Malpe said, we tearfully and lovingly remember in humble acknowledgement of the 2 decades since his passing. And like all of you who have lost a loved one, a friend, a sibling, a parent, a child, or a spouse, and have picked up the pieces to strengthfully advance into one tomorrow after the other, we lean heavily on the tenets of faith and the daily commitment to emulating his life's values of love, creativity, character, discipline, and above all, integrity. Much like today's luminous gathering astutely bemoans our beloved country, Nigeria, the losses of structural integrity and transparency condemns the malaise of impunity and advocates for higher vigilance for enshrining the integral standards of a truly egalitarian society. We need not only the tools of faith, advocacy, and commitment, but also of peaceable, active, direct action. In other words, the tool of nonviolence as a force for good, as an indispensable tool of social action and change. Instrumental to this is the clarity and the regrounding of the tenets that NAS holds true: brotherhood and, well, sisterhood, human rights and social justice, and the outright condemnation of violence in all its forms, whether emotional or spiritual, internally or in its external physical forms, which my father would outrightly condemn in all its forms. Why? Because, like Gandhi said, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. Violence begets violence, and even while the response to nonviolence might be temporarily more violence, we see that in the end, in the very end, in the functioning of an imperfect yet admired democracy around the world, the walk to the heel of democratic freedoms and rights is fraught with struggle and a historical account of great violence and deeper suffering. Nonetheless, nonviolence should not beget violence. Violence only comes up as a reaction out of fear, anger, loss of control, and an outlash to stymie and control the people. As people from Burma, Myanmar, Philippines, Rwanda, and of course, even in our beloved Nigeria. It therefore takes a whole commitment of self to the exercise and practice of nonviolence. Further, we can ask the people that walked with Gandhi on the Salt March, the Voters' March, and the children of Birmingham, Alabama in the 1950s. We can ask the South African voters who elected Nelson Mandela in the 90s. And we can ask our brothers and sisters felled in the October of 2020 at the Lekki Bridge in Lagos. Violence is fueled by hate, anger, fear, greed, and control. Yet a persistence on the path of nonviolence must be fueled by the immovable discipline and an unwavering commitment. My father lived and believed that the pen is mightier than the sword, and he died, believing that. He died informing his people and educating the masses. That was my father's life's work. Informing his people, educating them in a selfless commitment to giving voice to news, information, and education. He lived every day the three critical steps of Kingian nonviolence: information gathering, education, and commitment. So too are we in this gathering, and so too is the National Association of Sea Dogs, in extolling the voices that can inform, educate, advocate, question, and simultaneously provoke and challenge not only the out there larger society, but each of us as individual parts of this whole integrous Nigeria that we seek to build and we seek to achieve. As the scholarly speakers, Mr. Zitodo and Osaze Ozi, will articulate, the tenets of power imposition and disdain for the voice in the vote of the people can be tackled by the dispel of disinformation and a direct challenge of the intransigent. With the tools that we have and that we can learn, in the empowerment of the people, in the knowledge of their rights and the redemptive power of the vote, we must believe it counts for something. Direct and vocal action, such as public protests and demonstrations, is one in over 190 means of nonviolent social action, the ones that call for social change. And we applaud NAS for digging deep into that well of channels through education, advocacy, awareness raising, and social engagement, such as this gathering today. The path of nonviolence is a path of most resistance. Gandhi Ji of India, Nelson Mandela of South Africa, our own Ken Saro-Wiwa, and most notably, Dr. King of the US. In the journey to independence and to dispel the forces of discrimination, voter suppression, the pursuit of voter information and registration, the liberty of the voter, and the freedom to the ballot, the experiences of fledgling and nascent democracies around the world reflect the commitment to nonviolence around that path and that windy road to an egalitarian society and true democracy. Let us not grow weary in the good fight, but let us remember that the fight is not one of physical weapons, never one of physical weapons and war, but it is the committed pursuit of truth, courage, and justice in the educational, social, and economic emancipation of its people. Now, that's a commitment my father made in his lifetime, and one that we are all called to make in ours as part of the legacy for all generations to come. Thank you in advance, Mr. Zitodo and Osaze Ozi. Thank you to everyone that has made the time to be here. SA, for all you steadfastly do. Capone Abiola, thank you so much, Mope, for leading the charge in getting us all gathered here together and moderating. To the leaders and members of NAS for realigning to the true north of the compass points of the organization, which is a call out and the curbing of elements of separation. And these are usually manifest in colonization or colonialism, tribalism, and elitism. Renowned as he was in the language of the educated and the literate, my father was very much grounded and rooted in the grounds of his ancestral heritage, where he rests now in the reminder that he taught us. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for that beautifully delivered speech. For one moment, I was going to add you to the list of keynote speakers because that was more than a goodwill speech. Thank you so much for that very well thought out and researched speech. Thank you so much, Ms. Chizoma Opara. I see the matriarch is very proud. She is certainly beaming. Very well done, ma'am. So we quickly move on now to the issues. You have been able to outline a lot of them. Elections are well, it's next year. It's a whole 12 months at least to the next polls. But if you're in Nigeria right now, you will be able to feel the heat because as far as politicians are concerned, it's already started. And perhaps it started last year with the amendment of our Electoral Act. I know for a fact that Samson Itodo, who is one of our keynote speakers, the executive director of YAGA, was one of those at the forefront leading calls for the amendment of the Electoral Act and also staying with it, maintaining vigilance on the issues that affect how our elections are conducted and what will eventually happen. As we currently speak, we know that the Electoral Act, after it was assented to by the National Assembly, was sent to the president, who refused to send over some clauses in the Electoral Act. It was sent back to the National Assembly. They have re-amended it and sent it back to the president. I know that Samson's YAGA Africa and a host of other civil society organizations are leading the vanguard for the president to quickly assent to the Electoral Act so that it can be used in off-season elections like Ekiti and I think Ondo, which will be coming up this year. So I know that he'll certainly have a lot to tell us about our electoral process and what we need to be doing as we speak, what the danger that we face in terms of impunity and our elections and the continued threat to our democratic process. So without much ado, I'm going to be inviting him to the podium. Samson, I know you're here. It's good to see you. Welcome.
Thank you.
You have the floor now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Malwe, and it's great to see you on a different platform and not seeing you on my TV screen. First, let me thank NS NAS for this invitation to speak on a very crucial topic at a crucial time in our democratic history. And I don't take it for granted that you've offered me the opportunity to interact and learn. So thank you most sincerely for this invitation. Let me also thank and congratulate the Opara family. In this part of the world, there are a few models and icons that we celebrate. And when we have the opportunity, to celebrate Nigerians who have contributed, to the development of our country, I consider it a rare privilege. So congratulations and to you, and also thanks for that touching speech that you delivered about what your father stood for and where he will be. And as you kept on and you were reading, I asked myself, if he were alive today, will he be proud of the state of our democracy and our electoral process? What will he? I guess one of the things that I think he will do is to write against, this predatory political class that we have today. Ours is a country that is led by election riggers, a country led by people who sit in the National Assembly with fake results or educational qualification. Our political space is dominated by people who instrumentalize violence just to seize political power. We also see a political space that is dominated and shaped by a political class that cares more about using political power to serve primordial and parochial gains and not the use of the common good. And so when we have discussions around impunity and its threat to our democratic process or our electoral process, I'd say that the dangerous threat that we have in our electoral process is impunity by the political class. And we've got to situate this discourse within the context of a dominant political class that cares less about democratic values. Because one of the factors that drives impunity is the lack of respect for those tenets of democracy. So our democracy is run by individuals, whose democratic credentials is called to question. And one critical value of democracy is just accountability. That when you engage in a social contract between the people, and the whole social contract just conceptualizes two sets of agreements. The first agreement is that we as a people choose to live together, and what political scientists will call pactum unionis, that we've agreed to stay together. The second most critical agreement is that we have agreed to surrender our rights to a certain group of people. And these people, in exchange for the rights that we surrender to them, will provide for our welfare and security. And that agreement is the pactum subjunionis. Now, the big problem that we have is that you've got a political class that always seeks to procure political power and to procure it at all costs. So whether the people vest in them, the power and the authority to take decisions on their behalf doesn't matter. What matters to them is they want to secure power at all costs. And that is problematic. The second critical issue is the state of our democratic institutions. We celebrate that we are 22 years, or perhaps in June this year, or later this year, we'll celebrate 23 years of democracy. No doubt the country has evolved in its democratization process or in a democracy. But what can we say about our democratization process? And this relates to the state of the democratic institutions that we have. So you look across board within a democratic setting, this is what we call the agents of protection. The legislature is one. You also have the judiciary, you have the media and civil society. But what we have seen is a situation where this same predatory political class has captured this institution, disempowered them, so they are unable to serve and protect that and provide the protection that democracy requires to survive. If you don't have a legislature that makes laws to safeguard the transparency and the sanctity of the democratic process, if you have a pliant legislature, then democracy is imperiled. Then the outcomes of an election is clearly not the reflection of the popular will of the people. And in other words, over the years, what we have seen is a subversion of the popular will of the people. And when you run to the National Assembly to safeguard that process, what of that same political class or a particular politician? The judiciary is also suffering the same fate. You also look at different institutions. But yes, the manifestations of impunity are glaring in our electoral process, where politicians stuff ballot papers, where politicians compromise INEC officials, where politicians falsify results at gunpoint. They do all sorts within our electoral process. And the reason why they do that is that defective political culture that they want to secure political power at all costs, the zero-sum nature of our democratic process. And then the institutions that should advance accountability are very weak. And that is the state. And there's no way our democracy will survive without addressing impunity. We begin to imperil our democracy the day people feel they can break the law and there will be no consequence and no accountability thereof. And this is what you have. And even when the judges and the courts issue judgments, they are not obeyed. And so where is the place of the rule of law? Because first, there's a cultural issue that we need to address, that you've got a defective political culture, and that zero-sum nature, the zero-sum approach towards our politics. The institutions are also weak. They can't hold these leaders to account. So that leaves us with a situation where justice is for those who can afford it. It's for the high and mighty in society, and not justice for all. And so you see in the electoral process where politicians undermine and circumvent elections and say, let's end up in court. And even though attempts have been made to reform and review our electoral laws, the laws are still in place, but the politicians still break the laws. But what is the hope that I see in this discussion, and how do we address impunity? First, we need a new socialization strategy. And this socialization strategy needs to do three things. First, the democratic rights of citizens and their role in a democratic process needs to be emphasized. Now, we need a new crop of citizens who are conscious of their rights and how they can enforce their rights within a democratic setting, and what checks and balances are in place that they as citizens can activate. Is it things like recall? Is it public petitions? Is it instituting, strategic litigation in courts? These are ways that citizens, can do what? Can approach and deal with the question of impunity within our electoral process. The second pillar of this new socialization strategy is one that seeks to activate the values of patriotism and integrity in Nigerians. That regardless of the decadence in our society and this state of helplessness or hopelessness, that citizens can be patriotic, and our liberation as a people from these shackles of dominance by this same predatory political class that have absolute disregard for the rule of law will be hinged on how we as citizens are to show the values of integrity. And what that means is when politicians come by your actions, you same situation where when politicians come with thugs, and their party agents to disrupt elections, that citizens will rise up, work in unison, and repel any such attempts by and also the vigilance that our democratic process needs. Because the truth is, we're dealing with politics, you're dealing with democracy. Eternal vigilance, like they say, is the price of liberty. So our liberty from impunity is tied to how vigilant we are as citizens, and we demonstrate this at the different opportunities that democracy provides for citizens to influence the process. The third major pillar around this socialization is the one that sees Nigeria as one unit, and one body, one country, though with its different component parts. That the attempt by the political class to continually exploit the cleavages of ethnicity and religion to divide us in the course of elections is something that we need to resist. So these three pillars constitute this bucket of a new socialization strategy. And the entire goal lies in the fact that citizens have the biggest role to play in fixing this broken electoral process that we have that is defined by impunity. The second major sort of recommendation on how to address this is the fact that we cannot practice democracy. Our democracy cannot thrive without the institutions. It's unfortunate, or maybe fortunate, but we can't, thrive. Our democracy cannot function without a legislature. Our democracy cannot function without a vibrant free press and media. Our democracy cannot thrive without an active, viral civil society that is organizing both demographically and geographically and placing the demands on the state to deliver on its own terms in that social contract that exists between we and the society. And so our institutions need to live up to their responsibilities. If they perform their responsibilities, we can address this issue around impunity. For me, the third major and perhaps my last contribution on this critical question on addressing impunity lies in, this whole notion that our elections towards economic revitalization or economic or development, or elections are the election ends, we go be all and the is all representation of democracy. I think that we need to change. And why this is important is as we focus on the macro impunity during elections, we also need to look at the impunity in between elections, at the local, at the state, and at the national level, and not limit our scope to just, elections or general elections. That what is happening to our local governments? Why are our local governments dead? Why? It's also, it's one of the impacts of impunity, because the governors have become so powerful and overbearing that they don't want to be held to account at the local level. So they've captured the local government system within the country. And that's the closest government to the people. And it's critical that beyond elections, we look at, these different layers of governance and how they're performing and the kind of individuals who are going into those offices, but more importantly, the role that citizens play. I think these are just three sort of recommendations that I put on the table. And I know Barrister Uzi is here, who perhaps is even more knowledgeable and more experienced than myself, will highlight a few issues. Once again, thank you very much for inviting me to contribute to this. And I look forward to thank you.
Thank you so much. The way these platforms work, I sometimes wonder if we can clap. Can we clap? At least you can see a few of us clapping for you. Thank you so much for that beautifully delivered speech, which lays out what the issues are, what the problem is. You talked about the fact that our democracy has come a long way, but the problem right now is our democratization process. And that to solve this, we need to change our process of socialization. You've listed out a few of the solutions which you see that citizens need to be more aware of their rights, and they need to find ways to be able to deal with holding our leaders accountable. You've talked about the citizens activating the value of patriotism and integrity in spite of what they're currently faced with. And perhaps some citizens are aware of that. We saw an example of that in Anambra State, where despite a woman's poverty, she was able to resist the amount that was offered to her to vote for a candidate that perhaps was not a choice. And she said no. She said no, and she said no very strongly and vehemently, to be noticed enough to be filmed and even celebrated much later. So I think that people might be learning or aware of these things, that these are some of the things that they personally can do. You've also spoken about the role that an active civil society, which is where you play, and an active media could come in to also help hold our politicians, our political actors more accountable. I have to thank you so much for this and for also sticking to time. I'm not going to elongate the time now. I'm going to invite very quickly someone to give us another perspective. That person is no other than Mr. Oluwole Osaze Uzi, who is a former director of voter education at the Independent National Electoral Commission. Mr. Osaze Uzi, if you're here, you now have the floor. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I've been off and on. I've been having network issues. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, yes, yes.
Sorry?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. We just can't see you.
Great. Fantastic. My apologies. Okay, I didn't know what the issues are. I'm using the 2 or 3 devices trying to get through to give me the best connection. Okay, so I'm using 2 or 3 devices, so I keep switching from one to the other because of network issues. Pardon me. Yeah, so first of all, let me express my gratitude and appreciation for being invited by the organizers to speak at this event. I thank you so much, and I will not waste your time because I've lost so much time already. But it's been called upon to speak on impunity and Nigerian elections, the continued threat to democratic process. I'm sure something will have done justice to the topic. So I guess mine will be just to fill in whatever gaps, if any, there are, or to reiterate what he has already said. So what do we mean by impunity? I like to go to origins of words to get their proper meanings in context. And I think impunity comes from the Greek, two Greek words. Im, which basically means don't, and do not, or you do not, no punishment. Penal is punishment, so it means no punishment. In other words, if you break the rules, if you break a law, and there are no consequences that flow from it, then it's said that you have acted with impunity. And that really is permits our electoral process, if I may say so, in so many.
Oh dear, I think we've lost him. Finally, it looks like all the networks are conspiring against Mr. Oluwole Osaze Uzi this evening, because he says he has a few devices on just to try and see which one will give him the best network now. Hopefully he'll be able to come back and we might be able to continue with his own contributions to the discussion. But in the meantime, if we have any questions, we could indicate, and we'll be able to take send those questions to Samson, who has already delivered his speech. And I understand that he'll be leaving us at about 4:30 or thereabout to join another discussion. So if we have questions, comments, contributions as well to what he said, kindly indicate in the chat segment. I'll be taking them on. Okay, I've seen I've seen one question already. So Samson, please, while we wait for Mr. Oluwole Osaze Uzi to join this conversation again, I see this one from Njideka Ume asking, how can Nigerians in diaspora participate in Nigerian elections by voting? What is INEC doing to implement this? Most countries are already doing this. Do you have a contribution on that? Because some people will say this is also a big debate. Nigerians in diaspora participating in our polls.
So, my default, Malbe, please confirm you can hear me.
I can hear you now. I can hear you clearly. I believe others can hear you too.
I think so. Diaspora voting. The fact that we're having this discussion and it has become a debate just tells you the level of advancement of our democracy. And at first, we have evolved in our democratic process. The process was closed. Now it's beginning to improve. We're having discussions around Nigerians in diaspora. My personal view is that Nigerians in diaspora are Nigerians. And as Nigerians, the Constitution recognizes them, that they are part of this geographical entity. And being part of this geographical entity called Nigeria shows that you do have rights, and part of those rights are your voting rights. So why should your location be used, as a mechanism to exclude you from participating in the political life of your country? So I have always advocated for voting rights for Nigerians in diaspora. There have been several efforts to amend the Constitution and amend the electoral law. In the current reform process, diaspora voting was one of the issues that was canvassed. But what happened was, even though the National Assembly committees agreed to amend the electoral law, particularly the section that with voter registration, because the law says you can only vote where you register. The Constitution needs to be amended. So it became a constitutional issue. And sadly, it's not one of those issues that is being considered under constitutional review. There's a bill on diaspora voting being considered by the National Assembly. So I don't know if that bill will be passed between now and the 2023 elections. But with policies and legislations, I believe that we're going to get to a point where those laws need to be removed because they are draconian and very exclusionary, and it's going to take intense advocacy. It's just embarrassing that a common Niger Republic actually has diaspora voting. Nigerians vote in their embassies here in Nigeria for their national elections. Chad also does the same. So why won't Nigeria? This whole argument that we don't have data on the number of Nigerians who are spread across the world, I think it's just flimsy excuse. If we don't have the data, are we making efforts to aggregate the data? Can we have, Nigerians who are in different countries, either register to vote at the high commissions? I think it's possible. But there's also the geopolitical arguments that people advance, and which, again, I must put here for those who are advocating for this, we're mindful of the fact that there's a cross-section of our country who believes that that diaspora voting will serve and confer undue advantage to a particular section of the country because that section of the country have a majority of people outside Nigeria. And so when the conversations actually take place within lawmakers, their preoccupation is how will this serve their interest? How will this strengthen their political power, in Nigeria's politics? But I would say that beyond, voting, Nigerians in diaspora, can also contribute to this entire process of lawmaking, can also, contribute to voting. I know Nigerians from outside in diaspora actually come back home to vote. Yes, it's a demonstration of your patriotic zeal and will, but it also comes with a cost. Maybe as we look towards electronic, increased technology in our elections, that might provide another space, but there's also a difference between internet voting and electronic voting. And I'm not sure Nigeria is primed for internet voting at the moment, given the vulnerabilities and this whole cyber warfare that it's dominant at the global space. But it's sad, but I think we shouldn't relent. We should continue the advocacy for approval or legalizing diaspora voting in our political process.
Well, I know that, in that debate of diaspora voting, I know that, beyond what the lawmakers might be thinking, whether or not it will confer undue advantage on one person or one group or another, there are also talks about whether or not when people are not living in a particular environment or space, should they be able to influence what happens within that space, especially since they will not be living in the choices that they eventually elect, assuming their votes are significant enough to effect a change. What are your thoughts in that regard?
So, first, there are certain values, and the challenge is we've not built consensus around some values and principles that should shape public life and our democracy. And inclusion is one of them. And let's look at when someone is a citizen of this country called Nigeria, their location shouldn't even matter or count. What is important is, are they Nigerians? And whether they are in the US, whether they're anywhere, they are first Nigerians, so they should contribute, And when people make those claims, I ask them, these are individuals who have family members. Their family members are here in Nigeria. They've got brothers, they've got sisters, they've got relatives. So why do we think that the decisions and the choices being made does not affect them? Do you want to talk about the whether you call them direct investments or there's several
remittances?
Some call it remittances, some call it foreign, whatever investment, and check, the remittances. For the purpose of this discussion, we use remittances. Check the remittances that these people actually make and how they contribute to our GDP. right? So it gives them, on the basis of that, it's actually an expression of a patriotic will and desire. And also they identify with the country called Nigeria. And for, the point I make is, insofar as you hold a Nigerian passport and you are a Nigerian, your location should not matter, because you are Nigerian in Nigeria and you're Nigerian anywhere. That is the principle of citizenship that we should advance and protect, and not exclude them on the basis of their location. And I just think it's just flimsy excuses. And you know, this political class, when they are reluctant to pass a legislation or a policy, they begin to shop for inexcusable reasons just to justify that particular policy. And in this case, I think it's just one of them. Except if those who are in diaspora claim, you know, they don't have families here, and I don't think that's the case. I want to believe every Nigerian, regardless of where you are, you can trace your lineage back to this country called Nigeria.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Samson. I also see that we have more questions here. I don't know if you would like to just click on the Q&A. I see this from an anonymous attendee. How can the press truly be free, or be truly free, vibrant, and able to play its role as watchdog when politicians and their associates are the ones establishing newspaper houses and broadcast stations? Now, some people will say that's an entire thesis by itself. That's a question being asked here. There's also one here: how can we lobby to change the constitution? Is another question. Tonari Oworodo has this for Dr. Samson. In my view, electronic voting will reduce impunity in our electoral process. However, what are the factors militating against the use of electronic voting in Nigeria? Well, I see Mr. Oluwole Osaze Uzi is back. Mr. Uzi, it's good to see you. It's good to have you. I'm so sorry about the inconveniences which you are facing, but we're waiting patiently for you. So we're already taking a few questions just before you're waiting for you to try to beat time for you to come in. We'll go back to the questions shortly. I see them streaming in already. We have over 100 participants in this webinar. We have to thank you for trying again and again. I want to say,
I'm so sorry about that.
For not giving up on the conference. Thank you so much for being a part of it. So welcome once again. And now you have the floor for your contribution.
Well, thank you so much. I'll try and shorten what I have to say, and hope that the network will stabilize. I'm hoping so. Now, so as I was saying, the lack of diligent enforcement of the laws by our state agencies, that is why, to me, it's a cause of impunity in this country. And that's just not limited to the security agencies. Security agencies are law enforcers. They should enforce the law and ensure that all lawbreakers fit the law. But very often, either they're incapable of doing so, or they are unwilling. Sometimes they might be willing, but they don't have a political will to do so, or sometimes they're just incapable of doing so because they are stretched and they don't have the kind of cooperation that they need. The EMB, that's INEC or CX, who are responsible for conduct of elections, should enforce laws. They also have a responsibility. INEC, for example, prosecutes laws, and it's the responsibility of INEC to prosecute, but INEC doesn't have powers to investigate. So it's only when the investigators have concluded their work that INEC now comes into in terms of prosecution. Party officials are guilty of impunity. We know that very, very well. It starts not just in terms of selection of candidates at elections, and that's where you see the impunity so brazen, but also even in terms of selection of party officials, electing chairmen, electing executives of political parties. The law requires it to be by constitutional means, by democratic means, but very often you find out that this is not obeyed. So a few people, gentlemen, usually get into a room, not so gentle, I must say, a few men get into a room and decide who should be this, who should be that. And that's where the impunity starts. Because once you get in that way, then you're not likely to be democratic. You're not likely to brook any opposition, apart from you only listen to those who are responsible, the godfathers who are responsible for putting you there. Well, there are so many examples of impunity we can think about. There are some obvious ones like breaking the law, snatching of electoral materials on election day and stuff like that. But there are also other types of impunity. And this is where, for example, the media and CSOs come in. And that's where it's not just state institutions that do things with impunity. For example, if you're not allowed to announce results and the social media, people go on social media and announce results of elections that have not been concluded, that have not been officially announced by the commission, that is impunity.
I wanted to send
Oh dear. We're hoping that we'll have him back soon enough. I think that this network is serving us impunity right now, but hopefully, and maybe we should find ways to be able to check the network providers, because this is unacceptable. But I believe that he'll be back shortly because the video looks very good, and so far the audio has been all right. So I hope that he'll be back shortly. He was giving us examples of impunity and some of the examples that he's noticed, perhaps as his work as a voter education director at INEC. But I'm looking at some of the questions right now. I'm looking at the ones that we can easily answer, because as I did say, some of them are entire theses. I know that Samson has been at Oxford for a while. Perhaps he'll be looking at one of them to do his thesis. Who knows, I might provide suggestions for you. But I'm looking at this question from Mr. Tonari Oworodo. He's talking about electronic voting. He says, my question is for Dr. Samson. In my view, electronic voting will reduce impunity in our electoral process. However, what are the factors militating against the use of electronic voting in Nigeria, and how do we eliminate it? Perhaps you could address that while we wait for Mr. Osaze-Ozi to log back on.
Okay, well, thanks for that question. But just to mention, I'm no doctor yet, so I'm just Samson.
I'm just telling you that you should take one of the questions for your thesis.
Tying into my life. Thank you. I do appreciate it. On electronic voting, yes, I agree. Electronic technology will reduce impunity. It will reduce human interferences with our electoral process. We've seen that happen. But just a bit of a background. When you talk about electoral technology, there are 4 components of that entire value chain. First, the biometric registration is technology. Then we have electronic accreditation. Then the third component deals with electronic voting. And the 4th major component deals with electronic transmission of results. Now in Nigeria, we've tried the first, the second, and we skipped to the 4th, which is electronic transmission of results. Now, why have we not tried electronic voting? There are several reasons. First, the law didn't permit it until this year or last year when the law was amended. As you hear, the bill is currently before the president. That bill also legalizes electronic voting in our elections. So we hope if the president assents to it, it will give INEC the opportunity to introduce electronic voting at an incremental level in the course of our elections. But I also want to say that there are 3 or 4 major discussions shaped electronic voting is good. One state have tried it in Nigeria, Kaduna State, in their local government elections for 2 successive elections. They've tried electronic voting. It's got its own challenges, no doubt, but we need to ensure that we raise the awareness and the consciousness of people to electronic voting. The second is the legal framework, which this current bill before the president has addressed. There's also the issue around infrastructure, and tied to that is cost. Yeah, in Nigeria, we have 174 polling stations across the 36 states and the FCT. Now, if you look at procuring those machines, what INEC has said is the cost for procuring those machines is quite high and quite exorbitant. So investing in procuring those machines at this critical time may not be a wise decision. In any case, these machines are not procured off the shelf. They have to be produced based on specifications. Do we have the time between now and the 2023 to deploy that? My answer is no. So I think looking at 2027, we just need to come up with an elaborate plan that helps us transition from the manual process to electronic voting. But I also would emphasize, Maupe and to Tonari, that electronic voting is good for democracy, but it's not the solution to electronic or to electoral malfeasance within your political process. If you don't fix the political culture, these machines have their vulnerabilities, and the political class that we have in Nigeria will devise ways of circumventing or undermining those machines. And whilst technology is good, do not surrender your democracy to machines, because what becomes the result is what Raila Odinga of Kenya will call computer-generated leaders. And that is not what we want as a country. We want a hybrid of both manual and electronic. So both of them serve as a check on each other. But I strongly support electronic voting.
Thank you so much. Well, you did say technology is good. And I know for 1 minute, I saw Mr. Oluwole Osaze Uzi back. Again, we're not going to surrender. It's no retreat, no surrender with this technology. We'll keep waiting for him and we'll keep taking questions. Thank you for that very comprehensive answer to the question which was asked on the issue of electronic voting. I hope that Mr. Tonari is satisfied by the answer that you've given, and I'm sure he can indicate that if he is. I see a few more questions here. They are streaming in, as I did say. I did see this one earlier. How can we lobby to change the constitution? I know that you have very strong experience in that regard, lobbying to change the age to include young people, to be more inclusive. And that was a constitutional matter. And Yaga was successfully able to lead the vanguard in that regard. So I'm wondering if you'd like to share your experience on that, perhaps as a pathway to the answer to this question, which Njideka Ume is asking.
So I'll just say 4 things, Njideka. 1, clarity of the issue. Be clear with your demands. What do you want changed in the constitution? So ensure that there is clarity in articulating the goal and the vision. 2, understand the process. What's the process that the constitution has to go through? Unlike other legislations, once the National Assembly passes the legislation, the constitution at its level, and it requires the 2 chambers. As you know, we have a bicameral legislature. So the Senate needs to pass, the House needs to pass the bill, and both chambers would have to concur, or they have to harmonize their positions. And there's a required number that you need, to be passed by each chamber. In the Senate, you have 109, so you need about 74 or 72 thereabouts. In the House, you have 360, so you need about 240. And it depends on the proposal, because some provisions in the Constitution require more votes in the National Assembly to pass. So like amendments to things like human rights, the Bill of Rights, or things like state creation. There are some of these additional conditions that's required. The other point is to note that that bill also needs to go to the states. So the states also have to do what they have to concur with whatever bill passed by the National Assembly. And the state cannot add or subtract. All it does is to ratify. And you need 2/3 majority of states. And out of the 36, you need about 24 states for a bill to actually pass before it goes to the president for assent. So you need to understand the process. And amending our rigid constitution is quite a convoluted and cumbersome process. It took us 10 years to just amend the provision for reducing of age for running for office. So be ready to see this as a process and not a one-off event. The third thing is to look at who are the key decision makers and the centers of power in the National Assembly. One way you can do this is to look for a sponsor a bill. They provide a bill and they can sponsor the bill and they begin to push for the bill. But also work closely.
Oh dear, Samson, I don't know if it's my network or if it's yours.
But I think this is, there's also the politics, but I see Barrister Uzi is wrapping up because I see Barrister Uzi in now.
Yes, so he's back in, and your audio is very woolly. I can barely hear you now.
Oh my God, sorry. Yeah, but let's transition to Uzi.
Okay, thank you so much, Samson. It's good to see you back again, Mr. Osaze-Ozi. Thank you for not giving up. You now have the floor once more.
My apologies, And I heard something talking about electronic voting and everything else and transmission of results. This is part of the challenge we'll have to face, the reality of it. In as much as we love there to be electronic voting and increased use of technology, we must be alive to the fact that backbone is not as robust as it should be. And that is a challenge we have to be patient about. We have to keep working at it, and we have to invest a lot more in terms of technology, especially the backbone of our technology. The bandwidth has expanded considerably if we're really going to get it right and right across all 157,000 odd polling units in the country. I also heard talking about diaspora voting. I agree entirely with him. We have to amend the constitution, which requires you to be resident in Nigeria at the time of registration and time of voting. That has to be amended. There was a case that was taken before the High Court, and unfortunately, although those in diaspora lost the case technically, but the judge did advise that the bill should be sent to the National Assembly. And as Samson said, there's a bill for the National Assembly, but it's a bill to amend the constitution. So I hope that bill sees the light of day, and I hope it does so fairly soon. Unfortunately, I didn't hear quite a number of the questions, and I actually had hoped this would be more interactive and not just at the audience and get their thoughts, enlighten them about why we cannot do some of the things we very much want to see in our electoral process. So
Mr. Uzi, I don't know, perhaps if you put off your video, you might be able to address. Can you hear me? If you put off your video, perhaps you might be able to conserve some bandwidth and get some smoothness on your audio. Would really love to see you, but would love to hear you better. So we might need to deal with one or the other. And yes. So if you don't mind, you can go on. Let's see if this will be better. Oh dear. I don't know if anyone else can hear him. Can you hear him? Am I the only one who's, perhaps it's even my own network that's misbehaving?
Yes, so I don't know whether any specific questions coming from, as it were, an insider's view.
Okay, we heard you for a second and then we lost you again.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Okay, yes, we can hear you now. It's better now. Okay. So perhaps you'd like to just quickly share some of your insight as an insider, some of the impunity that you noticed and some of the things we can do to cure them.
Okay, impunity, as I said, pervades just about all the things that we do. In the pre-election stages, you get conflicting orders of courts. So the judiciary and the lawyers, I'm a lawyer, so I feel sad to say that we are also involved in that impunity. We keep on getting all sorts of conflicting orders. That not much will be done, will not be disbarred, have their silk, the senior advocate rank said that something will be done in that regard, that we are like this, conflicting orders can cause a lot of confusion. Election day, murder, kidnapping, we've lost several staff. Several staff have been kidnapped, as the commission itself has lost people like that. So there, the law enforcement agencies have to be on top of their game. Voter bribery, corruption. I know INEC is collaborating with the ICPC and the EFCC in this regard. Maybe control how money is moved. It is this country where people move bullion vans on election day or so close to the election, and we know what bullion vans contain. I don't think they contain gallons of water. Limiting the amount of cash moving around on election day or the election period. In helping us, which is bribery of voters, bribery agencies have to do a lot. But it's a very weak, it's not as strong as, say, the central bank. I always use the example that if a bank does not meet its capitalization ratio, if the bank or directors misbehave, central bank can remove directors. INEC cannot remove a chairman, secretary of any party, no matter what is guilty of. INEC cannot deregister any party except as provided for by the constitution. Unlike the central bank or NAFDAC, if you sell fake drugs, NAFDAC will go ahead and close your store or your shop. And then if you're dissatisfied or if you think they've acted illegally, then you can go to court and get a remedy. But INEC does not have such roles. Maybe if it had more regulatory powers, maybe, just maybe, it can do a little bit more in terms of curtailing the impunity of politicians, especially political class, especially in terms of selection of candidates, for example, for election. What can we do? We set up election offenses committee laws. Is there any hope that in corruption? Some people disagree. Maybe consider find local standard for citizens in action. Or I think we can expand on the use of such existing tools as punitive damages. Ordinary damages are to compensate a person for wrong done to them. But punitive damages, aggravated damages, can actually punish the person. And if it's heavy enough, maybe that might act as to discourage people. But I don't know how effective that is. But that is one of the tools that we can use in terms of checking.
Okay. Oh dear, Mr. Oluwole Osaze Uzi, I don't know, can you hear me?
If we're called as we.
Can you hear me?
Witnesses, we should be prepared to come and give the media we complain. But if I don't know how many of us be prepared to do that impunity as well.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's breaking, but I can hear you now, yes.
Okay, we could barely hear you for a lot. We got some of what you said. We heard something about moving money around or too close to elections. We also heard you talking about conflicting court orders. You talked about the powers of INEC. Perhaps the regulators should have more powers. I heard something around bribery of voters, and I also heard, I was not sure if I was hearing correctly, but those were some of the things that we were able to glean from what you were saying. Just hold on a moment. I will come to you again. I understand that Samson has to leave now. He did say that he had to leave at about 4:30. Samson, we have to thank you so much for being a part of this conversation today. Thank you for delivering such a succinct address and for taking questions. I believe that people have benefited. Members of the Pirates Confraternity have benefited immensely from your contributions, and we continue to wish you all the best. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation today.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And apologies, I have to leave. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, Mr. Oluwole Osaze Uzi, we're going to try one more time. Let's give this one more shot, and let us hope that it'll be back and better. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. So let's try again and let us see, perhaps it'll be better this time around. I've noted some of the points which you spoke to. The last I heard was punitive measures. I wasn't sure punitive measures for who or what, but perhaps you can take that point again and then we can continue.
I think you got the essence of most of the things I said. As to punitive measures, I did say that we should maybe utilize public interest litigation a lot more, expand the scope of local standards, expand the scope of the kind of action citizens can bring to enforce, first of all, against people who breach the law, and also against institutions who breach their statutory duty to enforce the law. So if the police, for example, refuse to prosecute, I think we should expand the locus of citizens to challenge the police to compel them, get an order to compel them to prosecute. And I did say that in civil cases that generally damages are to compensate a person for the losses, estimated losses suffered. But there's what we call aggravated damages or punitive damages, which is the opposite, which is now to punish the offender. So you punish them with a very, very heavy sum of money, such that perhaps they will think twice before going ahead to do those wrong things or violate the law next time around. So those are the two types of damages that we generally refer to in law. So these are some of the existent or extant tools that we can strengthen and use in terms of checking impunity. Everything in an armory, every arsenal in an armory have to be utilized in ensuring that impunity is curtailed, if not completely eliminated. Maybe it's idealistic and you expect that it will completely be eliminated. Use existing tools and tools. If institutions were strengthened, some people suggest that maybe some kind of ombudsman, an independent prosecutor, should be able to take some of these cases where existing state institutions refuse to, then appoint a special counsel to investigate and, if need be, bring charges against people who have breached the law. But I'm sure most participants are aware of the powers of the Attorney General to institute, to suspend, and take over and withdraw any criminal prosecution in the land. The Attorney General of the state, if it's a state offense, or the Attorney General of the Federation. That is entrenched in the Constitution. I believe it's Section 171, I'm also sure now, but it's entrenched in the Constitution. Maybe that is something else that we should look at. Do we want to retain those powers, or for electoral offenses, should that be an exception? Should we make a proviso that if it's an electoral offense, maybe we should do that? I feel strongly about the issues of qualification and disqualification.
It looks like we're not.
Being convicted of electoral offense does not disqualify you along those lines. That's a starting point.
Okay, so we heard you. Hello, Mr. Osazeuzi. We heard you around the issue of, you said you feel strongly around the issues of qualification and disqualification. And then we lost you.
Yeah.
So,
sorry. I said the people guilty of electoral offenses, conflict with electoral offenses, ought to be disqualified from holding public office for at least a period of nothing less than 10 years, maybe longer. Or some people feel that they should completely disqualify, should never hold public office. But I think 10 years would be enough deterrence. Anybody found complicit to have committed and convicted electoral offense.
Okay, we have that.
You heard that?
Yes, we
Yes,
did.
great.
Thank you.
So, yes.
So are you wrapped up now?
Well, more or less, perhaps maybe in answering questions, I would have preferred it was more like
Oh dear. Technology is really trying out and
I'm
testing
not
our
going to give a
patience
lecture.
today.
I remember the others are probably better qualified things. So
yes, yes.
Maybe I'll give me a point.
Well, I can see that there are lots of questions, and I'm sure that you'd love to engage with some of them. I don't know if you can quickly check the Q&A segment of the conversation. Perhaps there might be a few of them that you would like to answer. I know that Samson has already dealt with the issue of constitution change and also the issue of electronic voting. I see someone asking the question of vibrant press, but perhaps, I don't know if you want to add that, if that is going to be your forte, but perhaps we should address more directly issues that have to do with elections more directly. The question from Emmanuel Edozie, Igba Wole. Please confirm to me if you can see the questions.
I have a problem. Which specific one now on press?
Okay, Emmanuel Edozie is asking this. We have been complaining of ethics and tribal sentiments in our political space. What is the National Assembly doing to put an end to the state of origin in our forms? Perhaps I should rephrase that. Do you think that this is a problem for electoral matters, state of origin? Oh dear, it looks like we
I didn't quite get that. But state of the issue, first of all,
state of origin. Yes, please. Oh dear, the audio is really bad.
You can attend in the state. There's no requirement of residency before you can contest. Okay, let me try again. Is it any better now?
Yes, slightly better now. So yes, okay. you may attempt the question again.
Slowly and legibly as I can. Now, state of origin is not really an issue because you can vote, you can register to vote anywhere, you can contest election from anywhere. There are no requirements of residency or state of origin in contesting elections. That is not really an issue. With women, there's been a bit of a challenge. I recall, I think it was the third assembly where you had a lady from Edo State and married to somebody from Taraba, and she was being told that she'd go back to Taraba to contest. But in Adamawa, you had a lady who was from Southwest who was married to somebody from Adamawa. But fortunately, both of them were in the Senate together. They only did one term, mind you. And I don't know whether those were factors which were considered in not returning to the Senate or not. But you don't have to, there are no requirements for residency or citizenship. As long as you're a Nigerian citizen, you can contest any election, register anywhere and contest any election from anywhere. Does that do justice to the question?
That's very helpful. I don't know whether we should push our luck and ask one more question. Or perhaps what we should do is, because I understand that they're going to be inviting you back very soon for a Citizens Summit Town Hall very, very soon. So perhaps what we could also do is also ask NAS to please compile these questions that have been raised here. And perhaps that would also be, that is if we lose you. So we're going to try one more question and then hopefully we don't lose you. But if we do, that's going to be the solution that we will have to resort to. So let's try this one from Igba Ogole saying, over time, a lot has been said on the media space about evil impunity. The evil impunity constitutes for the democratic process. The efforts Yaga and media houses can testify to this. Beyond this media and public engagement, what practical things can we do to stop impunity by our politicians and their collaborators? Secondly, the same politicians are now jittery over coup d'etat in other countries. Much as one would not recommend military intervention in our polity, can there be a practical citizen action against impunity like the NSAS protest?
That's a very good question. I think it's something let me be very honest. I don't think I have the answers to everything. I don't at all. I think when we brainstorm, perhaps we can synthesize ideas. I offered one or two about state institutions, strengthening state institutions, for example, considering the appointment of introducing our law, things like an independent counsel, independent prosecutor who can gather information. And if there's prima facie evidence of impunity against the law, he can prosecute, no matter who it is. So that I don't know how he's going to be appointed. People say a chief justice, but the president has a hand in appointment of chief justices. The governor of the state has a hand in appointment of judges. So I don't know whether that's the best model we can come up with. But citizens must get that commitment. I think in 2015, there's a lot of citizens' engagement. They wanted a change of regime. I think that was fairly obvious. And citizens did a lot in terms of participation, in terms of assisting INEC in doing things, in terms of saying our votes are not for sale, in terms of logistics and ensuring relating to the night people brought generators and things like that. I think somehow we lost that. I think partly because of impunity, quite honestly, because one of the fallouts of impunity is that apathy. A lot of people now lose interest because they say, look, my vote does not count. There's nothing you can do. We cannot change this regime, or we cannot get our own people elected. So that's one of the most dangerous fallouts of apathy. It's one of the most dangerous fallouts of impunity. We shouldn't allow people to get away with things. Citizens have to be strengthened. The legal framework can be tweaked, but I think I said public interest litigation. What that means basically is that people should be more interested and commit their resources, commit their time, engage good lawyers who can fight causes using the same laws to achieve purpose. That is one of those things. I don't want to show that mass protest or the 2010, 2020 idea is the solution, but I like the energy, the galvanized people. That is one of the good things that came out of 2010, 2020. I think the anti-SARS protests. If we can organize in that way, I think unfortunately, we have to be careful about it being hijacked. But that is why I believe we should use the legal instruments that are available to us, legal tools that are available to us, and call people to order. A few CSOs are doing that. Serap and a few CSOs, Yaga on his own way, but in terms of
oh dear, we have to activate Plan B, which is to collate all the other questions that have been asked here. I have to apologize to everyone who has asked a question or two, and ask that NAS, Programs Director, will be able to, put this forward at the next program. Mr. Oluwole Oseze-Uzi, if you can hear us, we have to thank you so much for not giving up on this conversation, for attempting at every point in time when you are logged out to log in back again. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Let me quickly invite Mr. Folami, Mr. Ese Folami, now, who's the Director of Programs for the National Association of Sea Dogs, to give us closing remarks. Mr. Folami, over to you.
Thank you very much, Makwe, for this, doing this for us, as it's been like technical glitches and all of that, but I want to start by really appreciating the Ralph Opara family and for the patriarch of the family himself, having been a trailblazer and setting us forth in this path. We really appreciate you, especially Ma'am. I want to thank the speakers. In spite of the technical glitches, Samson Etodo and Mr. Oluwole Oseze-Uzi, for accepting our invitation to speak at this 13th Ralph Opara Memorial Lecture. We will, as we promised, be bringing back Mr. Oluwole. He had actually expressed his preference for an interactive town hall setup, which we're glad we will be taking him up on. We will provide that in a not too distant future on the platform of the NAS Citizen Summit, the town hall sessions that we'll have. I cannot thank you enough, Mrs. Malpe Ogun-Yusuf, for anchoring this program, for each and every attendee for making out time to join us today on this lecture. We want to part ways here by saying the national dialogue against impunity is something that involves all of us. We cannot afford to pass the buck in any way. We cannot afford to stay detached. We saw the resilience in the Nigerian here at display, in spite of the technical issues. Mr. Oluwole Osazeuzi kept trying, and the moderator kept pushing for us to at least get something out of this conversation. We will not stop here. It's a continuing conversation. We have started some kind of sessions going on the social media. We will continue on that path, but again, we will be moving into a more interactive sessions, or especially on impunity and the Nigerian election, as we build up towards making sure that our votes truly count in 2023. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Thank you so much for having all of us. Thank you. Thank you to the Ralph Opara family as well. Thank you, Chizoma and Madam Francesca Opara. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure doing this. And all the best to all of us as we head into the polls. Let us not forget that decisions are in our hands. The power is not just in our thumb, but also in what we do and don't do on election day, or before and on election day. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this.
You can say something.